Today we're going to talk about the characteristics of life. All living things share all of these characteristics. The first one that we're going to talk about is made of one or more cells, and the picture right here shows a bacteria with some white blood cells that are attacking it. A bacteria, even though it's really, really small, is still considered a living thing because it's made of a cell and has all the other characteristics. The other picture that you see over here is some skin of a frog that's been stained. Frog skin isn't normally this color, it's been stained. And you can see lots of individual cells here that all make up this skin of the frog. So all living things across all of the kingdoms, all the way from bacteria to you, are made of one or more cells. Organisms also have an internal organization. Even single-celled organisms are arranged in an orderly way. If they have a nucleus, it's usually somewhat in the center of the cell. They have other pieces on the cellular level, other organelles, ribosomes, and etc. that do specific jobs, and they're usually found at particular places. Even something as complex as a human being is arranged in an orderly way. If they weren't, it would make it incredibly difficult for doctors if they were going to do like an appendectomy, which is taking out an appendix. If everybody's appendix was in a different location, it would be almost impossible to find it in the abdominal cavity. So most everybody has things in the same place, and organisms do as well. All living things grow, get bigger, increase in mass, and increase in volume, and they also develop. Development and growth often get confused. Development is changes in form during an organism's life. For example, a frog started out its life as an egg, which hatched out into a tadpole, which became a frog. So that is easier to visualize than with people, but there are changes in form that occur in people as well. Here's our frog example. We start out here as an egg. We have this very fish-like tadpole. The tadpole gradually gets bigger, but then it starts to develop these legs, and then we have this weird in-between stage where it still has its fish-like tail, but it has all the legs and it's just about ready to become a frog, and then it actually becomes a frog. It's a little bit easier to talk about something that goes through drastic body form changes and think of it as development rather than development in a person, which often looks like growth, but isn't really. Growth is just getting bigger, volume-wise or mass-wise. The fourth characteristic is usually the one that's the favorite of the teenagers that I deal with. It's reproduction. All living things have to be able to make offspring. If they don't make offspring, there's not very much future for the species to continue. This reproduction, we often think about reproduction in a very human sense of the word, as in sexual reproduction, but there's a lot more organisms out there that reproduce without having sex, and this is an example of one. This is a hydra. It's a little organism, lives in fresh water, kind of a freshwater cousin to a sea anemone, if you know what that looks like. And this is how it reproduces. It grows another little guy right off the side of its body. And then when this little guy gets old enough, he'll just drop off, and then he'll be his own little hydra. So reproduction, both sexual and asexual. Organisms also have to be able to respond to stimuli. Our environment is constantly changing, and we have to be able to respond to that. When we're cold, we have to be able to warm ourselves up, so our body responds to the stimulus of being cold by shivering, which is really tiny little contractions of your muscles to generate some heat. And humans are not the only ones that do this. All organisms have to be able to respond to stimuli, either internal or external. A stimulus is a part of the environment that causes a reaction. When we're talking about the shivering example, the stimulus would be the cold temperature. And then the response is just the reaction to the stimulus. When you're exposed to the stimulus of cold, your response is to shiver. When you're exposed to the stimulus of a warm temperature, then your response is to sweat. And there's our guy kind of melting in the sun. The sixth characteristic of life is all living things require energy. Some living things can make their own, can take the sun's energy and change it into energy that they can use. They are actually pretty fortunate that they can do that. A lot of other organisms can't do that. Like we can't go stand in the middle of the soccer field and not be hungry afterwards. We can't make our own energy or convert it into a form that's usable for us. So we have to depend upon other things for living. Most organisms that need some sort of source of energy, ours comes in the form of our food. Plants can take the sunlight's energy, which is not very satisfying for us, but they'll take that energy and they will convert it into energy that they can use and we can use as well. Animals and fungi can't make their own energy. They have to eat other things or decompose other things to get their nutrients. So two big groups here, and requires energy. All organisms are one or the other. They can either convert light or chemicals into energy that they can use, or they have to eat other organisms. What do they use the energy for? They use it for growth, for development, for reproduction, and homeostasis. Whoa, what is this homeostasis thing? That's a big word. Don't have a large word freak out. It'll be okay. Number 7 on the great hit parade of characteristics of life is maintain homeostasis. Hey, there's that word again. Maintaining homeostasis just means that you're regulating internal conditions so that they remain balanced. One of the reasons that when you're in a warm environment that you sweat is because your body temperature has risen and it's trying to lower that body temperature, and one of the ways that it does that is to make you sweat. By losing the water, it actually takes quite a bit of the heat out of your body, and then that allows your body to cool. So it's really important that organisms keep an internal balance. I'm not talking about like standing on, a very thin board and not falling over. I'm talking about everything needs to be kind of regulated in your body. It has very narrow limits that it's able to exist. If it gets outside of those limits, then things that are not great start to happen. An example is the acid content or the blood pH that you have in your body has to be between 7.45 and 7.55. So it's a very narrow limit there. It's only a tenth of a pH range that it can actually be. If it goes too low, then your body does stuff to get it back to where it should be. If it's too high, then it does other things to bring it back. So your body is constantly doing these things all throughout your day, and you don't even have to worry about it. It just automatically happens. So all living things have to maintain homeostasis. The last characteristic of life is adaptations evolve over time. An adaptation is an inherited characteristic. You don't get adaptations during your lifetime. You have to inherit them from your parental units. So these can change over time. The environment influences which of these are able to continue on in the species, and some of them don't continue on. So as the environment changes, species are able to evolve new adaptations. They get new variations, and some of them are helpful, and the ones that are helpful are able to be passed on to the next generation. This helps not only the organisms to survive, adaptations help the organisms to survive, but it also helps the species to continue. Evolve just means change over time. This is kind of a famous picture where you start out as a monkey and then they move through all of the different stages and end up hunched over a computer, just sitting there all day. Evolve just means change over time. Okay, so that's it for today. Thanks for joining me.